Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter and that is Connor, and we are going to be talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 1 Episode 11. It is called Vortex. So full spoilers for the episode as always. So this is an Odo focused episode where we get a little bit of a tease to his potential like not even his history specifically, but his, which culture he comes from, his race, what planet he might be from. Those questions kind of come up, and it doesn't really answer a whole lot of this episode, which I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting them to get to solid answers on that yet, but it does give him some kind of tether. He at least meets someone who has heard of his kind before, and it certainly gives him a bit of a connection to things.
He knows what questions to ask now,
and he's got a name. I mean, not him, but he's got a name for his species that maybe
very generic name, but yeah.
He could have predicted this. Honestly, it wasn't that complex. The name Changeling for a race of shapeshifters does not sound that hard to predict, but I
wonder if it'll play into any, like, Changelings specifically have, stories and culture around just those that specific term for a shapeshifter. So I wonder if it'll play into any of that. Yeah.
And it's very smart as well, because it reminds you that he is that at the start of the episode. It's actually probably one of the best Odo was that all along in the scene moments the show's had, but it has more of a purpose in this episode, because it's there to remind you this is what he is, and this is actually what the important plot of the episode is going to be. Outside of the surface level of like this fugitive who, do we trust him, do we not, what's going on with him, we'll get onto all that stuff, but it has a purpose of like reminding the audience and establishing that this is the key thing we're going to be looking at.
It does. I have a question of how he managed it though. Like, what are the actual, the details of? Does he have to? Does he stand on the tray and then shift into the glass? Does he, like, as he's shifting into the glass, fall sideways onto the tray? Does he? Does he become the glass but leave himself 2 little feet to run onto the tray? I have questions.
These are good questions. I'd have to go back and watch the scene again, because it might have been impossible given where he was in the scene prior, but maybe he just transforms into a glass next to the other glasses, and it's basically just hedging his bets that he'll be one of the ones put on the... No,
but he can't, because Quark tells his brother off, saying that, there's 5 glasses for 4 people, so he's an extra glass, so he wasn't picked up.
Well, to be fair, Rom's an idiot. That's been established repeatedly
that's
in
true.
this show. So it wouldn't shock me if he did. I don't know. Maybe he came in the room, put the tray of glasses down before everyone came in, kind of thing. I don't know. Which does beg the question: does Quark like jump up on the table to?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. But hey, when the glass smashes and then it reforms T-1000, like, and it's like, oh shit, Odo was here, because I knew he was suspicious. The whole previous scene was setting up that he was suspicious of all this going on.
Yeah.
So it made sense that he was spying on them, but it was a fun moment. Yeah. So the gist of the episode is that there is an alien here who has come from the Gamma Quadrant, and Odo's suspicious of him. Meanwhile, Quark has also been talking to him, but he's also meeting with 2 aliens, this twin set of aliens who come from a culture where everyone's kind of twins, and they all believe that they're twins, like half of them, so they have this kind of like dual life culture thing going on. But they're there to sell this fancy stolen egg thing, this golden egg, this Fabergé alien egg, and it's pretty clear quite quickly what's really going on here, but Quark tells them, hey, you never told me that this was probably stolen, and there's been news of a stolen egg from a spaceship from a couple of weeks ago, and they're very angry about it, and then in comes our Gamma Quadrant alien, who points his gun at them and is trying to steal the egg from them, but it becomes quite clear very quickly that this was a setup by Odo hired this guy, this Gamma Quadrant alien, to come in and do this so that he could effectively end up with the egg without having to pay for it. This was one of Quark's little
and he almost got away with it,
mischievous schemes, which it leads to some fun Odo and Quark scenes, and they tend to be some of the highlights of the show. Or even just Quark getting scared and like being mad at his brother, because there's a great moment where Odo's kind of putting all this together and implying it all, but it's Rom who jumps in and says, "Are you suggesting my brother?" And he just says what the whole theory is, and Odo just turns and goes, "What an interesting theory, Rom," because he never actually said it all out loud, and Quark's head just sort of pops in the frame like, "What are you saying, brother? Stop this right now."
Just shut your mouth.
So yeah, so that's all fun stuff. But that's the key setup. So but one of the twins dies in the scene, right, where he comes in with the blaster, and Odo arrests the Gamma Quadrant alien, who, for the sake of a coherent conversation, his name is Croden. So just so we can call him something. So Croden's in custody, and it feels like the episode's just dealing with his his trial and maybe what was going on here with Quark and who's at fault. But very quickly it shifts into the main interesting meat part of the episode, which is he refers to Odo as a changeling, which immediately makes Odo go, "Wait, why are you calling me that?" He reacts to it, and then he claims that he's met changelings and that changelings are a thing on his world, and he knows where they're from, and says, "Hey, if you maybe give me some food or something, maybe I'll tell you something about them." And he kind of proves at least that he knows something about them, because he whips out this little piece of technology that works very much like Odo does. It's a little shape-shifting locket that turns into a key. So
it's just enough to be like, hey, he definitely knows something.
Yeah, there's definitely something to this. And obviously we find out later that a lot of what he said was kind of a lie, and that changelings are just kind of like something that people on his planet talk about like they're a myth. Like, he didn't really know if they were real until he saw Odo, but he did have this key thing, and he says he got it somewhere, but it's not from changelings. He didn't get it from changelings themselves. So we'll get into all that as well. Before we go any further though, did you enjoy the episode?
I did, for the most part. I think it's another very focused episode. There's not really anything except this main plot.
No, I mean, it cuts back to Quark a few times, but even that's setting up the fact that the angry twin is going to come hunting Croden when he's been transported back to his home planet for prosecution. Yeah,
and I think it might at points it might actually feel a little bit too focused. That there's no kind of side plot to add any extra depth or maybe a little bit of comedy to offset some of this, because it tends to be a very dry episode. Don't wrong, all of it that is there is quite good. It's definitely important for Odo to have this, but it does come off feeling a little bit dry at times, I think.
I don't know. Odo tends to be pretty wet looking enough. It felt pretty wet to me.
That was terrible.
That was great. I mean, I liked the episode a fair bit, actually. I think obviously setting up this pass for Odo makes a lot of sense, and giving him some sort of tether to actually hold on to and question his birthplace and his birth planet. And even the idea that Croden a few times kind of when he's trying to manipulate him a little bit, admittedly, but there's still some truth in what he's saying. He's like, "Hey, you're an outsider. You're one of a kind on Deep Space Nine. You're clearly lonely, and that's why you were suddenly so tempted to pursue this key and ask about it." Because Odo goes straight to Quark and starts asking questions, and it does feel like his motivation's kind of a mixture of him just doing his job, which we know he cares about, and he's very he's very strict with himself when it comes to being the security chief. But it does kind of feel like his motivations are also kind of influenced at this point by wanting to know more about where he came from to validate the legitimacy of what he's saying and the key. There's this added element to it. And I think as it's going through the rest of the episode, I think the stuff with Croden, where ultimately it gets to this point where the planet Croden's from wants him back because he's considered a criminal, and we hear some bad things about this planet. We hear that there's no trials there, people are just executed, and then later on we find out from Croden himself that the first thing they did was they killed his family, and he has no idea what crime he committed originally. We know why his family were killed, but obviously he's fled and since, so he knows he's done things since then that are considered crimes, but he's not really even sure what the first crime was.
But the Bajorans are like, well, extradition treaties, bitch. Basically, send him back.
Well, you say Bajorans. I mean, obviously Kira has that opinion, but it's Sisko who ultimately makes a choice.
He said it comes from the Bajoran government. He kind of says that line. That's their decision.
True.
He's just enforcing it.
True. But yeah, but he makes the decision to enforce that, if that makes sense. there's a moment in the scene where he's with is it Kira that's with him in the?
I think so, up on the deck.
No, when he's on the ship, because he takes.
Okay.
Is it Dax maybe? I can't remember who he goes with, but Cisco goes with someone to the planet to talk to them about the fact that they've arrested this guy, and they're like, "Oh, he's a criminal. We don't care about your culture. Just hand him over." Like, that's basically what the guy says. We don't want to know you. Just give him back so we can do something. And it does feel like Cisco's contemplating maybe like, should I challenge this? Should I? And it's one of those things where if he hadn't killed someone in like a sort of like criminal activity, which is effectively how everyone became aware of his existence, then maybe the conversation of, do we ask him if he wants like, asylum? Do we ask him, if he wants to like escape?
Might have been a bit different.
Yeah, but because he was in a criminal activity and he killed someone, it's kind of like, well, we have to try him for a crime if we keep him. So, it just makes it a bit more murky and a bit more like, oh, well, it's not really worth fighting for necessarily. Obviously, I think by the end of the episode, we have a bit more sympathy for him because of where his plot goes. But
still kill a dude, though.
He did, yeah. You could argue the twins themselves escalated into the fight, though. They could have just handed over the egg.
You could. They weren't exactly, like, nice people.
I love that Quark's to blame for all this, really, which is the funniest part of it.
I feel like no matter what happens in this show, no matter how bad things get, it's kind of Quark's fault, though.
There was a little moment, actually. See when the twin comes in and threatens Quark, and Quark's got, like illegal ways to access the ship's or the station's database. He's like, oh, get me out that hacking chip or whatever it is. I do love that there's a little moment when the guy leaves and he's found out that they're on this ship going back to Croden's home planet, and he leaves to pursue them. Rom turns and says, oh, you're a genius, blah, blah, for this and where. And they're talking about how, well, because Quark says, well, if he gives up the prisoner, if he gives up Croden to this twin, then like he'll interrogate him and maybe find out that they're involved, and he'll come back, the twin will come back and kill them because he'll realize that they're. And Rom's like freaking out and whatever, and he says, but then Quark reassures him and says, no, like Odo will never give him up. Like, he's too proud. He'll never give up the prisoner. He'll fight to the bitter end to do his job. But there's a little moment when Rom first says, oh, he's going to kill Croden and Odo. There is like just, maybe I'm reading into this too much, but there's just a little moment of like, I don't know, guilt, maybe not the right word, but just a little bit of like, I don't think Quark likes the idea of Odo dying. Even though he's always fighting them, there's just a little bit there where it's like, he might feel bad about that if it actually happens.
Oh, he definitely would. Yeah, we had this, was it last episode, the one before? It was recently where it was like, well, Odo, he kind of had that, that respect. Like, well, hang on now, let's actually listen to the man. Because at the end of the day, he is almost like this friend, sort of. Not quite, but almost. It's kind of the closest thing Quark has.
Unless you count his brother, but I mean, that's such an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would. Yeah. I like that small moment, though. The big thing, though, is that Croden's like talking about, he claims that there's a colony of changelings in this vortex, which is where the title of the episode comes from. That he's hidden there before because it's quite sneaky and it messes up, ship sensors and things like that. It's also quite dangerous if you don't know what to turn off because certain ship functions can, cause a reaction, so on and so on. But he keeps claiming that and he's trying to convince Odo to go there. And I kind of like that Odo, while he obviously is very curious and wants to pursue this, I never feel like, until his hand is forced, it never once feels like he might actually give in. And that feels very true to Odo's character, that as much as he might want to know this information and maybe pursue it if there's a chance that he can meet his own people, I never believe for a second that he was ever going to just choose to do that. They end up in the vortex, but it's only because the twin starts firing on them, and it's like we've
got no other choice now.
Yeah, this is how we can survive, is to go in the vortex. And of course, the reason why Croden was so determined to get in there is because he actually had his cryogenically frozen daughter in there that he was protecting, and his whole mission here was that he's accepting that he's going back to his home planet to face death, but he's basically like, this man Odo is going to take you somewhere safe, implying back to Deep Space Nine. Like, if I die, that's fair enough, but I had to get you out here so that you can go back with you.
There was a definite implication at some point here that, Odo, you just adopt her. Don't worry about it. You just have a small child now, please.
Well, that was the next scene back on the ship where he's like, I've got one last thing to ask of you, and Odo's like, Wait, what? You're going to ask me to be a and Croden's like, look, you're pretty lonely, and she'll also be the only one of her kind on the station. You'll actually have a lot to relate to each other, so maybe this is like the best idea. And then the opportunity presents itself with the Vulcan ship showing up, saying, "Hey, like, do you need assistance? You're such a..." Because they're on one of the runabouts, so they're on a tiny little craft, and this Vulcan ship's like, "Hey, do you need any help?" And Odo, makes kind of the slightly cheeky heroic choice of being like, "Hey, I've got 2 survivors from a ship inside the Vortex. Do you want to take them back to Vulcan with you?" So he makes this choice to let Croden go, which is a really nice moment for him as a character, because I never felt like he was betraying his job role, which he cares so much about throughout the entire episode. And I still don't think that this decision at the end really feels like he's out of character. If anything, what this does instead is that it shows that if push comes to shove, there is like an empathy to Odo that he will eventually hit, where he understands that this father's willing to go back and get killed as long as his daughter can survive, and that's ultimately what convinces him that he should probably be let go.
Yeah, I think we've kind of established with Odo, he cares more about justice, as opposed to following the exact spirit of whatever the rule is. Usually, those two things are kind of hand in hand. But clearly it gets to a point here where he's like, I don't think this is justice. Their rules are kind of out of whack here. This doesn't seem right. Yeah. So, he does reach a point where...
And I don't think he's going to tell Cisco, or Cisco will ever find out, but I totally believe that Cisco, if he had all this same information, would have made the same choice.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like, I definitely got that feeling that this is not something that ethically Cisco would disagree with Odo. And maybe that just what makes them a good pairing.
It's very similar to what we had with O'Brien, with the other alien in the hunting one.
Yeah, that show's I mean, Deep Space Nine is a show, and we're only 11 episodes in. It definitely feels like it's challenging this ideas of not just assuming someone is bad because they've been labeled as something. Like, there's great shades of grey. There's more to it. The ethical right and wrong doesn't necessarily match the letter of the law, or whatever it might be.
It's definitely something we've seen a few times on Next Gen. It tends to be like dealing with planet-wide government systems, kind of just like, this culture is maybe not quite right.
That's more of a personal level, yeah.
This is down to individuals. And
it's also more frequent as well. Like the fact that we've had multiple examples of dealing with these types of characters. And to be fair, I think in almost every instance, I think they've been handled quite well. Like, I don't think any of them have came across as lacking. And I'm not saying everything about this is perfect. The actor playing Croden is okay. I don't think he's great. He does a decent enough job. But I think it works so well as a challenging idea for Odo as a character to have to make this ethical choice that it makes us like him a bit more, because he's made this kind choice. So, it leaves him with this idea where, because I actually relate to him at the end, where he's on his own in the ship, and he just says to the computer, set a course for home. And I almost wish there was no lines after that, because I actually think his performance when he says the word home has this little, asterisk on it where it's like, home, but do I really consider that home? Where is my home? And maybe I do consider that home. Maybe by the end of the show, the whole point is he realizes that is his home and that's where he belongs. But
I was going to say, that definitely feels like the end of his arc is to find his people and kind of have a choice to go and live with them, but ultimately realize that he's not one of them anymore, so to speak. He does consider Deep Space Nine now his home instead.
Yeah, or he never does, and that's something else he can deal with. Which is it's interesting because you can compare that to Data in some ways, and even though it would be similar in some ways, I do think the interesting difference is that with Data, he's one of a kind, but he knows where he comes from, and he knows that there isn't like a race of like robots that he comes like. Whereas with Odo, if the mystery is never answered and he just never knows where he came from, like, he's right to assume that at some point he comes from a culture or a civilization. There's a species that he comes from naturally. Oh, unless the twist is that it's not, of course. Maybe we find out he's some experiment gone wrong, but
it could be. I am more inclined to go with the first, because the changeling, the changeling myths is, it's the shapeshifters, and they steal a human child and they leave a changeling in its place. And I can't feel that. That feels very much like what we're doing with Odo, is that he's kind of just been left here. Maybe it's not that he's lost. Maybe he's a plant of some sort.
I definitely agree that it's more leaning towards the first. And I would also say that on that subject, what if we find out that what if he does find these people and then he finds that he disagrees with who they are? What if he disagrees with their ethics?
Awful.
Yeah, because maybe they are malicious. Maybe they are more of a villainous entity. And
my God, he's he's Goku from Dragon Ball.
I do not get that reference, but that's okay.
Anyone who is familiar with that will understand. He is Goku. He's here. He's been planted. Again, assuming any of this is remotely true, but in this context of this theory, he is Goku.
Okay. But no, it was a nice bit of focus for his character. We know he doesn't know where he comes from, and this episode kind of like reinforced that, gave him a little tether of hope, and at least showed us, at the very least, if there's one thing this episode added, shows us that he does care about finding out. It's not just that he doesn't know. Like, it's something that means something to him. And because he's not a character that shows his like emotional side a lot, so showing a little bit of this hand from him, I think, is a good little tether for the audience to latch on to him. I mean, I already liked him; he's already very entertaining, but this makes us care about him a bit more and makes you kind of root for him eventually getting some kind of answer.
I think Odo was already a pretty likable character, but never hurts, especially it's still relatively early on the show to kind of be pushing these things forward.
I think it's interesting that this comes right after the episode that really fleshed out Quark as well. That's back to back, arguably my two favorite characters right now, both got fleshed out like that. That's not to say that I've ruled out anyone else. I don't think there's any characters that I don't like on the show. I think that like there's maybe a hierarchy just naturally to begin with, but I don't think any of them are a negative.
No, and I think it's noble. The top half are probably the ones who've had the most screen time, unsurprisingly.
Yeah, because obviously Sisko's really strong, and I expect there'll be a lot of great stuff with him as we go throughout. Yeah, I think that's fair.
It's kind of funny how like Quark's had more screen time than a lot of the main, crew members of the ship.
I think it's for two reasons. One, they know that they're onto gold because the characters are fun in concept, but also the actor, Principal Snyder from the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, he's great. Like he's oozing slimy charisma. It's fantastic. But I think the other part of it is that because he's so different from the rest of them and he's so deceitful and is always scheming, he's a great catalyst as a character to get other things going in conflict. So it just... He
is. And I think no matter which set of characters which of like, okay, so this is an Odo episode, last time was last time was Quark, but like if you have a Sisko episode, for example, whoever you have, it's easy to just throw them in against Quark and have him involved in something.
Yeah, Dax had a good episode. The trial episode with Dax was, I thought,
that was good.
Was really solid. So I mean, most of them have had good. Even Bashir's episode was a little rockier, but it did have some really good moments.
It did, and he was kind of reinforced by he had the next gen episode as well.
Yeah, he had that to sort of back it up. So most, and even like I think we got expecting to hate the kid the most, right? So Jake's kind of got this target on him where he's like, is he the Wesley? But honestly, the little story with him and his friend, the Ferengi, and like Sisko realizing that this is actually a good relationship, that's something that he couldn't have done himself, was actually kind of a sweet little story that added to the...
Yeah, I'd say he's maybe still a little bit too much of a goody-goody, a bit like Wesley.
Sure. That might change over time though, but...
yeah.
Even he's... But I think perhaps even the goodness of that story in some ways was like what Sisko realized that he was wrong about. So I think Jake might always just be a character that's used to tell a story about Sisko, rather than Jake himself being the sole focus, but...
Possibly, at least for now. Maybe that'll change as he gets a little bit older.
For sure, yeah. So no. So yeah, we're beyond halfway because there's only 19 episodes in season 1. So it's interesting to see how all these different characters are shaping up in the just the overall world of the show and how they all relate to each other. It feels really established now at this point after almost a dozen episodes. But so that's a solid episode, I thought. But so coming up next time on Deep Space Nine, and Deep Space Nine is next. There was 2 Deep Space Nines back to back in the original air dates. So next up is Deep Space Nine again. Episode 12 is called. Thank you, IMDb. Battle Lines.
Okay. It's always a good, interesting title. Or brings to mind things immediately.
Yeah. The description on IMDb goes as follows. While showing Bajoran's spiritual leader Kai Opaka the wormhole, she, Cisco, Bashir, and Kira crash land on a moon. The locals are in a never-ending war where they cannot die.
Okay, I like the sound of this. Sounds fun.
Yeah. So yeah, you've got Cisco, Bashir, and Kira. Notably, I mean, Cisco always gets a little bit because he's the commander, but Bashir and Kira did not have much this episode, so this obviously gives them a bit more time. Plus, yeah, a war where no one can die, except our main characters presumably can die, so they're in danger. So
yeah,
I mean, obviously in a meta sense they're not because they're our main characters. That said, though, spiritual leader, she's a guest. She could snuff it.
Yeah, she was in the first episode, right?
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
She was the one who gave Cisco the vision stuff.
Quite right. So recurring character, sorry. I should say.
But I mean,
guest.
Still snuffable.
It's snuffable, yes, very snuffable. So we'll see how that goes next time. But let us know what you thought of Vortex in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All of that helps. As does, of course, go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, where you can support us financially on a monthly basis, or you can do a one-time thing on YouTube with the super thanks. Any and all help is appreciated. So thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek. And I don't know how I'm going to top what Odo actually did in this episode, but what if Odo, instead of pretending to be the glass... No, hold on. If you pour a liquid into Odo when he is the glass, does he absorb that liquid when he reforms? Or is there a little spell like he pissed himself when he was reforming on the ground?